Hello and welcome to Frontlines of Social Good. My name is Jay Frost. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to part of the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Today's program focuses on a set of challenges and opportunities that are defining fundraising right now. The decline of small donors, the erosion of trust, and what it will take to rebuild both in a rapidly changing landscape. We'll hear from two leading voices on these issues, Roger Alley, Board Chair of AFB Global, and Derek Baker, author of A Better Way to Fundraise, in a pair of pre-recorded conversations about what the latest data tells us and what fundraisers can do next. But first, let's take a look at some of the largest philanthropic gifts announced since our last episode and the top news impacting the nonprofit sector today. We'll begin, as we always do, with the top 5 gifts in this cycle, beginning with the smallest of those and working our way up. At number 5, the Leona M. and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust has awarded a $6 million grant to Kahuku Medical Center to expand its emergency department and upgrade electronic health record systems, supporting improved access to care for communities on Oahu's North Shore. Coming in at number 4, Anant Yardi has donated $8 million to the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi to support innovation, research, and institutional development. Number 3, in California, Montage Health has committed $10 million to California State University Monterey Bay to support the development of a new healthcare workforce education and training pathway, strengthening regional capacity and addressing critical staffing needs. Number 2, this time around, the Labat family has committed 40 million Canadian, or approximately 29 million US dollars, to support a new integrated model of child and youth mental health care through a partnership involving Sick Kids, CAMH, and the Gary Hurwitz Center for Community Mental Health. And number 1, topping the list, a group of anonymous donors has made a $50 million gift to Mass General Brigham to advance gene and cell therapy research in cancer care and related diseases. Have we missed a gift that you know about? Please let us know. Top news this week. According to the nonprofit Times, recent analysis of federal tax changes suggests that charitable giving in the United States could decline by $5.69 billion, or about 1% of total giving. That estimate, based on research from the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy and presented by CCS Fundraising, indicates that while a new universal charitable deduction could increase participation among non-itemizing households, it may also reduce incentives for higher income donors and corporations. The nonprofit Times reports that the result could be more donors overall, but less giving at the top, creating new pressure on organizations that rely heavily on major gifts. According to Candid, public awareness of funding pressures on nonprofits remains limited, even as these pressures intensify. In analysis of the Give.org Donor Trust Report, based on a survey of more than 1,500 U.S. adults, Candid found that fewer than 1 in 3 respondents were aware of federal funding cuts affecting nonprofits in 2025. At the same time, the report shows that 36% of respondents said they would be more likely to donate if they knew a nonprofit had lost government funding, and 62% said that such cuts would harm vulnerable populations. Clearly an opportunity for communications with our donors and prospective donors. In another story, according to the nonprofit Times, the state of Alaska has filed suit against 6 crowdsourcing fundraising platforms, alleging that some campaigns used inaccurate charity names, logos, and descriptions, potentially misleading donors. The article highlights concerns about donor-advised fund structures, noting that in some cases, donations were routed first to a sponsoring organization rather than directly to the charity featured on the fundraising page. The case raises broader questions about transparency, donor intent, and accountability in digital fundraising ecosystems. According to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, the top 50 U.S. philanthropists committed $22.4 billion in 2025, a 35% increase over the prior year's inflation-adjusted total. At the same time, reporting from Fortune, the New York Times, and Yahoo Finance indicates that investor Peter Thiel and others in his social network have been actively discouraging billionaires from participating in the Giving Pledge, raising questions about the future of large-scale philanthropic commitments among the ultra-wealthy. And finally today, Analysis from the Blackbaud Institute, covering more than 7,500 organizations and $66 billion in fundraising activity, shows that large nonprofits grew revenue by 11.7% in 2025, while mid-sized organizations saw modest gains of about 2% and small nonprofits declined by 6.4%. It's a pattern that reflects a broader shift. Fewer donors overall, with more giving concentrated among a smaller group of contributors. For many organizations, that raises a set of practical questions about sustainability, access, and long-term resilience. To better understand what's driving these changes and what they may signal for the future of fundraising, I spoke with Roger Alley, board chair of AFP Global. Here is that conversation. Okay, Roger, great to see you again. It's been a while since we've talked.
It sure has. Great to see you, Jay.
I know that this is a great time to talk with you about, of course, AFP Icon and among other things. And so maybe we can start by talking about the forthcoming meeting in San Diego. It's one of the most important gatherings, if not the most important gatherings of people in fund development anywhere. Why is this maybe the right moment to be talking together, but particularly about things like donor participation and trust?
Yeah, it is. It's such a widespread issue. We all face as fundraisers and leaders with the decline in giving, in particular, smaller donors, the decline in trust. And I think of AFP Icon, which is the largest fundraising conference of fundraising professionals, at least in North America and possibly around the globe, 3,000 fundraisers, leaders, and that's coming up in less than 5 weeks, April 26th to the 28th. And it brings together individuals who are facing these challenges with the decline in participation, the decline in donor trust, and the opportunity to learn best practices, the opportunity to share common threads of what they're seeing, whether it's in their own organizations or their own communities. So I think it's fitting when I think of Icon and this issue in particular, because the theme is to shine, to share, and to spark. And I think that's all relevant, in terms of this challenge that we face.
I know that one of the things that AFP focuses on is not just anecdote and education. Those are very important to have the conversation and to, of course, provide an education for people in the field so they can do their work ethically and well. But AFP is also doing a lot of work on the data itself. And one of those elements is the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. And before we go any further, can you just give an introduction for those who don't know what that is, to what it is, as well as what is AFP's role in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Fundraising Effectiveness Project is a compilation of data that is sourced from 12 partners that work with AFP Foundation, who's the sponsor, and provides regular updates on a quarterly basis and annually a comprehensive report that pinpoints and shows donor trends. And in a nutshell, it is a useful tool to see how our sector is doing, but also to benchmark with our respective organizations that we work for and we represent.
Now, I know that there are some key numbers in that report every time it comes out, as a quarterly as well as an annual. So what are some of the numbers that you're looking at that you think are particularly meaningful right now?
Looking at the data, sort of this is probably pointing to the third quarter and into the end of 2025. I think what we've seen is that total dollars are, slightly up. But at the end of the day, donor participation is still declining. And that is a fundamental issue that we continue to see. And declining as in the number of smaller donors that are giving is on the downward trend. And it's about 1.3% of a decline. And it's worrisome. And it's worrisome because those are the smaller donors that, I believe and we believe is that element of civic participation, the core thread that all our institutions depend on. And I'm talking about the donors who give the $25 and $100. And we're very grateful for those major gifts, but we all know that they're smaller. It represents, about 20% of our donor base. So that in a nutshell is kind of what we're seeing. If I were to pull out some large scale trends, that continually is the issue and why it's so concerning for all of us in the sector, including our members at AFP.
One thing I hadn't thought about until right now as we're talking is that there's a desire for all of us to know these numbers as they occur. And so the quarterly reports are really helpful to those of us who follow these numbers really closely. But there's criticism in the corporate sector about looking at things on this kind of short-term basis. And I don't know if that kind of concern or criticism has come up with FEP data or other data in the sector about donor trends. Do you think that looking at things that tightly, that closely, and that often contributes to an awareness and an ability to make changes that benefit donors and organizations, or does it also sometimes have the effect of making us worry too much?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I think it creates that angst and anxiety every time you look at it or you think, oh my goodness, the needle hasn't moved in the direction that we want. However, at the same time, I think by having that sort of focused look on a quarterly basis, I think similar to what you do when corporations track revenue, typically it is on a quarterly basis that you see, okay, are you on track with your metrics? What do you need to do in terms of cost correction? And I think the same is true, but what I will also say is that organizations that are actively fundraising should use the data to come up with mitigation strategies that will help to reduce or increase that level of trust, that level of transparency. So, it's things like, do you increase your storytelling in an impactful, creative way? So more use of social media, more use of videos, ways in which you transform all of the good practices we all know about stewardship in ways that are different. So I think that is how the data can be useful if you look at it more frequently.
Well, in fact, you've kind of jumped ahead to something I was going to ask you about, and there's a middle piece there that I did want to probe with you, and that's when you're looking at this information, this data on a quarterly basis and annually, what is it telling you about how donor behavior is changing, not just in terms of the aggregate, if things are up or down, but also how people are responding to all those different triggers or stewardship strategies that we employ in order to make sure we have a good, strong relationship with people. What are these numbers telling you about donor behavior?
It's telling us, I think, a couple top line, what I would call trends that donors are feeling over solicited and fatigued. And we hear that or we see that, why gifts are decreasing or that donors choose not to continue their gifts. And I think that's coupled with what I would say is, the economic pressure, because we have seen that there's a rise in inflation. We also see the cost of living is increasing significantly, in particular around food security or individuals that are unhoused. And I think that is impacting donors. So they're making difficult choices. And while the data itself doesn't specifically point to that, if you have those deep conversations or you take the time to ask the donor, why did you stop giving? Why did you cancel your monthly gifts? You will hear some of those themes. And I think that is the piece of, well, how do you shift and how do you change that? And I think those are the elements where I feel the collective we, should be more nimble in a way to mitigate the risk. All the risk in a strategic way is sort of, I guess, what I'm pointing to at the end of the day.
Sure, sure. And you mentioned trust before. Trust is implicit in this whole conversation about stewardship. I guess it's in all the things we do. But can you talk about that connection between declining participation and trust a little more specifically? I mean, what are you seeing in your role at AFP, in your role outside of AFP, but just also maybe as a donor? What is the role of trust in all this, and where do you see that impacting things, and how is it changing?
It's intimately related, the decline in giving and trust. And in my view, there's a trust deficit because donors are increasingly asking, where's my money going? How do I know I'm making an impact at the end of the day? And I also think that our younger donors and our millennials are looking at their giving that is different from their parents and from donors that we have stewarded for decades. So I think there's also that difference because younger donors want to be connected to a project, and the level of loyalty is about deeper engagement. And if I look at my own giving, I think areas where I've questioned, do I continue or do I give more, is where I did not feel connected, or there was an episode that caused me to think, gosh, I'm not appreciated. And a very
Mm.
practical example is that I get a form letter, and while it's beautifully written, it's not for me because my gift wasn't specifically recognized. Oh, I miss the thank you card I used to get, and someone didn't take the time to do that. That makes me feel connected, but more importantly, it aligns. It's my values, my trust, and my desire to continue to support that organization that has waned, and it's waned because what I expect is not what I receive.
I want to ask you about that for just a moment. There's been a discussion or argument among people in the sector over the last 5, 6 years in particular about whether or not those kinds of actions, which some of us see as just fundamental and others see as, maybe not essential, if they are catering too much to donors, if donors should just be expected to give, or if, without doing things like sending personalized thank you notes. I've heard that criticism. I'm sure you have as well. How do you respond to that?
I learned on my very first donor visit, which I was not overly prepared for because I just felt like this was, something that I needed support or someone to go with me. But what the donor said to me stuck with me, and I share this quite openly, that fundraising is about friend raising. And what that really meant is that our role as fundraisers and leaders in the sector is to build stronger, lasting relationships. And if you think of your own relationships and what you do and how you do it, I think that is applicable. So the warm personal notes, the opportunity to ask donors to be in or to be involved in a behind the scenes tour, a call from the CEO to thank that loyal donor who has made multiple gifts for the last 10 years, all of the above counts. So, yes, for me, I think of donor stewardship having, three pieces. There are the formal thank yous, the letters, the things we routinely do that is the obligation of the organization to the donor. But then there's recognition, the recognition that you might do in your community impact report. A larger gift gets recognized with public recognition when a community impact report. But more importantly, it's the third, it's the stewardship. The stewardship is that personalized piece that matches whether the donor is at a small gift level or a large major gift. And that is the piece that I believe that creates that bond, that level of trust, and that sense of my gift is making a difference, and I feel connected not only to the organization, but what I am choosing to support. And I think that is the difference, but I also think it's important to look at the construct in those three areas to truly lean in where you need to. because sometimes the check mark is on the letter. Oh yes, we have sent the letter, or that the donor is recognized in an appropriate way. But it's more than that, and there are different schools of thought about that. But I would advocate that if we continue on the stewardship in a way that's personalized, we will be able to reverse, or at least change, that level of declining trust, because we would have donors who are more aligned and loyal to the organization, because they feel that sense of connectedness, that level of accountability by the organization, and they feel a stronger bond ultimately to the fundraiser, to the organization as well.
You mentioned some generational differences earlier. How universal do you think these stewardship touches are between generational cohorts, between ethnicities, different domestic markets? Because in fact, you said North America before with AFP. It certainly is a global organization, but you're in Canada, and this particular meeting is being held in the US. So there are lots of different ways that donors perhaps identify themselves, but maybe also we tend to identify them. So are all these things that we're talking about now, from writing a thank you note to a CEO's phone call, are those fairly universal in terms of their importance and meaningfulness to donors?
It differs. It differs by culture. Even within North America, it differs depending on the donors' expectations, and also the diaspora of that particular donor cohort. And the example I can think of is, when I worked with the Asian community, part of building trust is those initial longer conversations that do not have an agenda, or it is not structured, as you alluded to with the phone call from the CEO. That might be viewed as, a little more invasive or surprising. And I was speaking with a chapter last week, and we were talking about outreach to diverse communities. And I said, many times we think our outreach is, oh, well, we've sent the information and we've invited individuals from a respective community that is not at the table, and we think we've done our work. But have we actually paused and met with those leaders to say, what would you like to see, or what would engagement look like? That is far different from, sending something out or saying, well, we did and they did not show up. Well, there's a reason why they didn't, because they did not feel like they belong. And that is an important piece in, even with stewardship. You unlearn the practices until you understand what would be acceptable practices, or practices that would make donors from diverse communities feel included. And I think that, in a nutshell, is where we should go, or what we should do more of.
And I know that's something that there's been a lot of discussion of within the world of AFP for some time, and also interrogating those terms about inclusion, but also belonging, which have different resonances. Is belonging a term that you think is more than symbolic? Is it meaningful to the discussion that we're all having about making sure that everybody is, part of this family that we're trying to build as we help our organizations to do good work?
Yeah, belonging is the core of trust and inclusion, in my view. And I'm really proud of the work that our global board is doing in the space of belonging. It's been a personal goal of mine when I first started. And here we are, like 14, 15 months into my tenure, and our board has leaned in to define belonging, to define the conditions that our board feel like they belong around the board table, to develop a case for belonging and a work plan that includes how we show up at meetings and who we are as a global board. And we've put that on our website because I believe that it is something that members, chapter leaders should take note of. And I don't think we should be secretive about it because I think it shows that we're serious, that part of being included is creating that sense of a culture of belonging. And that's been a focus for us, not only at the board table, but the way in which we engage our members and our leaders in the sector. So important work, but work that is what I would describe as a journey. It's an intentional journey, and it means rolling up your sleeves and understanding someone else's perspective and not yours, or putting your practices or your beliefs first.
Right, right. Thank you for that. I'll make sure we include a link to that in the show notes and the chat during the live session. You just mentioned 18 months in. Is that where you are for the?
It's getting there. It's about 13, I think,
Oh,
13 or about 13 months so far, 13 or 14 months. But it's quickly going by. But it has been a gift. I say to our chapter leaders when I visit, and I've been to so many chapters in the last little while, it's been a gift because it's about the conversations and the just the commitment, the sheer commitment to our sector. And that really warms my heart to see so many people doing good, social good for our communities.
About how long do you have left with this particular role?
With this particular role, until the end of this year, so December of this year is when I step into the immediate past chair's role.
And so, what are you hoping to do during that remaining time? I know it's going to be very busy because once again you have the big meeting in San Diego. That's a big piece of this puzzle. But what are you hoping to do, and what do you hope to see happen in San Diego? What are you looking forward to there as well?
Yeah, so in terms of the remaining time, continuing my visits with chapters and our members so that I am present, but also as a lifelong fundraiser and someone who loves to share knowledge. I've been doing lots of sessions, and it's an opportunity to really share my knowledge, whether it's in major gifts or leadership trends. So that's one piece. Continue the work in belonging. That is still on the board's agenda, and we'll complete our work later in the fall. And I think the last piece is just around we've been modernizing our governance structure, in particular the size and structure of the board, our volunteers committees. So that is a body of work that I'd like to make sure is completed. And, Icon's going to be fantastic. It is so enriching. In particular, one of our keynotes is going to be very special with Bob Johansson. And he's focused just on the future and this chaotic world we live in. So I'm looking forward to that, but all the multiple sessions and connecting and reconnecting. So that is going to be fantastic. I mean, where else would you find over 3,000 fundraisers in one building? I don't think there's anywhere else. So in itself, that is where the magic happens.
It is a big meeting. It's also a very fun meeting. I'm sure we'll see many of our friends and many of the people who watch this there. We'll look forward to that and look forward to seeing you there. Roger, thank you so much for sharing some of these thoughts about what you see in the sector, what you've been seeing personally in your role, and for all you do for AFP and for this world of fundraising.
Thank you, Jay. It's been a pleasure.
My thanks again to Roger Ali for spending some time with us. If you're interested in hearing more about him and his work, we do have an episode of the PM podcast focused on his origin story. And for more information about the Fundraising Effectiveness Project and the upcoming AFP Icon Conference in San Diego, you can learn all that at the AFP website, which of course is at afpglobal.org. Additionally, I will be there at the conference, as we are every year. And I'll be interested to conduct interviews with a number of people who are award winners and others, and I hope to meet you there. So if you will be coming to the conference, please do stop by the booth of our sponsor for this entire series, which is EverTrue and DonorSearch. They've been sponsoring this work for the past 10 years, and we're excited to be there and talk directly with you. Now, of course, to understand what's driving all these changes that we've been talking about, it's important to know not just about the things that Roger was sharing, but also what are some of the potential other approaches that people are finding are helpful to building relationships in this environment, and how might they reshape the way organizations engage supporters over time. For perspectives on that issue, I spoke with Derek Baker, author of A Better Way to Fundraise, a new book just coming out in the weeks ahead. And here is that conversation. So, Derek, it's really a pleasure to have you here and to finally meet you, at least virtually. Thank you very much for making time to be on Frontlines.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a privilege, and the same is true. It's great to finally meet you and have a chance to talk.
I know we're going to be talking a lot about your book, which is A Better Way to Fundraise. There are a couple of subtitles here. If you don't mind, I'm going to read them for people who are either viewing this later or listening to this later, which is Treat Every Donor Like a Major Donor and How AI is Enabling Major Giving at Scale and Reshaping the Future of Fundraising. There's a lot in there, and there's a lot to talk about. I do want to begin, if you don't mind, with just talking about the very beginning of the book, which I loved.
Sure.
And it talks about this airport example. I know that you're a storyteller. You said that before we went live. And it's always helpful to begin with a story, but that's a story I have a feeling you know well. Can you kind of bring that back again, recount that for us, and how that kind of contributed to your interest in writing this book?
Yeah, it really was the origin moment. It was the birth of the idea, and it just came to me in O'Hare Airport in 2017. It was a winter night, and as anybody has probably experienced on a winter night at O'Hare, when the storm is blowing in, it was getting a little chaotic. There was, the snow was falling, and this particular storm was not predicted. It was one of those kind of pop-ups, winter storms, and it was just throwing the airport for a loop. So here was the thing, is that I'm a frequent flyer. I've got all the status in the world with my preferred airline, but on this particular trip, I was flying on a different airline. I was not on my main airline, and I had made that choice because it was like, well, my preferred airline didn't serve this particular small town, Midwestern town, and so I thought, I'm just gonna take a chance here. Well, here I am. I'm standing in the middle of O'Hare, and it's just chaos. And I just, I've kind of reached for my phone instinctively with the thought of, well, I'll just call my airline's, platinum, diamond, whatever service line, and they'll get me taken care of. And I realized I ain't got that to fall back on. This is right. I'm flying tourist class like anybody else. And just as that moment kind of dawned on me, I had this kind of thought pop into my head, which is, why can't airlines just treat every customer like they're valued? But the conviction that immediately kind of fell upon me was, well, we do the same thing in fundraising. We have this tiny slice of donors, these major donors that have this relational experience that we pour so much time and energy into, but everybody else is kind of a body and a turnstile, right? Just that's not treated like they're valued, not treated with dignity. And that was the seed of the idea. It's like, that was when it kind of hit me. There's got to be a better way to do this. And that kind of started me down this journey. And that was all the way back in 2017. That was 9 years ago. And it's culminated in a certain sense in the release of this book, which is coming up next month.
And I do want to ask you about that one step more, which is that there are usually two reactions that people had. Yours is the most generous, and maybe you had both. I don't know. The first one being, well, you know what? But that's my status and I've earned it. And I do want to go back to that concept because some people in fundraising might say, no, the reason why we focus on this particular group of people is because of all the good they do and the generosity that they provide and et cetera. And so that's why we build this kind of a status program around them. You have two things in this book that I think are really wonderful and wonderfully executed in terms of introducing us to the concept that we can treat everybody well, something you were just saying, but also that it's possible to build a program around that. So that's, I guess, the AI component as well. And I do want to have you take us through that. But I do want to read a quote from this, which I thought was really profound. You said, when talking about the unprecedented scale of fundraising now, that it normalized something subtler, the idea that fundraising was fundamentally about broadcasting messages to large audiences and optimizing for immediate response, which sounds a lot like my experience with United Airlines for that matter. So can you talk about that in a little more detail about how fundraising ended up positioning us all to feel like it was our job to treat this group of people very specially, and then the rest of us, in this turnstile approach?
Yeah, and I want to say, first off, this isn't a criticism necessarily of approaches and all of that. The reality is that system developed over time and it worked very effectively. And it developed naturally as fundraising grew as an industry. And it worked for many years remarkably well. And so but there was a branch, and in chapter one of the book, I kind of that chapter is called "How Did We Get Here?" And it kind of lays out kind of the path in which, how fundraising has developed over the years. And it started very relational, but then at some point along the way, the fundraising industry learned that, hey, we can take a lot of these consumer product marketing techniques and apply them into fundraising. It works to sell soap and paper towels, it can sell causes. And sure enough, it did. And every step of the way, there was kind of a further step in the emergence of that. And the television was a big piece of that, right? You and I are old enough to remember Jerry Lewis's muscular dystrophy
Oh yeah.
telethons on Labor Day with
Yeah.
24-hour extravaganzas, and right, basically, that was really a moment where fundraising became fully into the mass model broadcast kind of thing. That as long as you could broadcast a message and people had a phone, that was kind of how you fundraised. And it was all about managing the mass market and everything. And again, that worked well for a long time, but the world has shifted so much. And it's interesting because I just posted about this the other day. Consumer marketing is shifting as well. Just the things that I'm writing about in the book, they're nice, they're good theory, but the reality is they're reality. These are things playing out in real time today. Our world is changing. We haven't really figured out yet entirely that all of the challenges we're seeing in fundraising are not a temporary dislocation. They're a fundamental shift in terms of how the marketplace works. And the book talks about that. And if we don't make this shift, if we don't make a shift towards more relational based fundraising, it's really going to damage our industry, I believe. And so where we've gotten today, ironically, is fundraising is more transactional, more impersonal, more disconnected from personal relationship than at any point in my memory and probably in most people's memory. And the consequences of that are becoming impossible to ignore. Fewer people are giving. Those who are giving less consistently. Donor retention rates are declining at alarming rates. First-time donors are increasingly hard to acquire. Organizations are on this hamster wheel where they're running faster and faster and not moving forward. And a lot of that is because the world beneath our feet has shifted, and we're not seeing it yet to the full degree. But the reality is the future is all about moving towards shifting from what I call the shift from volume to value.
And doing that does require not just a mental shift, but kind of a shift in how we do our work, doesn't it? So, can you take us a little bit through what you're advising organizations to do here? Because it will require not just different tools, but different ways of using those tools.
That's right. So at its core, what the book is talking about. And one of the chapter 4 in the book lays out what I call the 7 behaviors. And these are 7 behaviors of major gift fundraising. And it lays out, what they are, but basically they are approaches that we take in major gift fundraising, right? That really kind of build relationship and gratitude and all those sorts of things. And what the book argues is that AI and other emerging technologies, it's not just AI, but there's a lot of other emerging technologies related to that are opening the door for us to be able to take those core values and principles and extend them across the whole donor base. Now, I don't mean that tactically. That's important to understand. I'm not talking about tactical treatment. I'm not talking about scheduling thousands of one-on-one coffee meetings, with donors or whatever the case may be. It's about taking those core behaviors. As an example, one of them I kind of label as listen first, right? We talked about broadcast. We talked about those telethons, where it was always just sending the broadcast out there. One of the paradigm shifts I think that we need to make is moving away from a broadcast mentality to a two-way dialogue mentality. And here's the thing about that. AI and technology providing all kinds of opportunities to listen to donors. I mean, you're in that industry, Jay. You really understand. We know more about donors today through technology than we ever have. The challenge is, how do we translate that into engagement?
As you're describing this, it strikes me there's another part of the book and something that I feel strongly, which is that over time, leaders in general, but fundraising leaders specifically, have had a more and more distant relationship with maybe the majority of the people who support the same work we do. And it's hard to kind of make that shift to listening. So even if we have the tool, how do we get people to say, no, we're going to take a certain amount of our time and our bandwidth and our attention and focus on really trying to listen to the majority of the people and build that into our program. So every time we can not just show that not just listen to them, but show that we've heard them.
Yeah. This is, I think, the paradox that our industry is stuck in. The reality is, if you spend any time on LinkedIn, if you spend any time listening to podcasts like yours, if you spend any time kind of in conversation with nonprofit leaders, you're going to hear them talking about the things that we're talking about here. We did a study a couple of years ago, a major national study on the state of fundraising, the state of nonprofits, and all of the things that I'm advocating in the book. Right, when I talk about focusing on major giving, when I'm talking about focusing on retention over acquisition, changing the metrics, changing the way, everybody seems to agree with that. There was, we have such a diverse marketplace in the nonprofit sector, but there was widespread agreement that this is the direction we need to go. The paradox is change is not happening. And it's hard, right? It's hard to figure out why that is. But that's where I think it starts with really changing the conversation. There's so many elements where we have to stop and just think about, okay, yesterday's models are not working effectively anymore. And it's not simply because of macroeconomic issues or this or that, or interest rates are high or this or that or the other thing. It's because our whole, the donor base in general, has shifted. And what I'm saying basically is, it's not that people are becoming less generous. It's that because of the ways that we are locked into fundraising in the industry, we're becoming less relevant to donors.
Now, there's one part of this that I know is potential risk with this potential reward, which is that every time there's a new technology introduced, and you get to this in the book, of course, whether it's examples from the past would include email and social media, et cetera. But every time there's a new technology that's introduced, it should bring us closer to people if we used it the proper way. But in fact, what has happened is that people use that as a way to distance themselves so they can operationalize and create efficiencies and all that stuff. And I do know that people talk about AI often in terms of efficiency. So when it comes to the use of AI and other tools, but now it seems like everything is AI powered one way or another, how can we ensure that organizations and the leaders within those organizations will see that this is a route to actually building relationships with real human beings and not just a way of increasing efficiency with their time.
I agree. I think that's, you nailed it right there. I think that is the watershed moment our industry is in today with the advent of AI in particular, because of this kind of trend of where we've become and where how the whole donor base, the patterns and generosity and the behaviors of donors have changed. What you just articulated is the most important decision we have to make as leaders in the nonprofit industry. And that is how we are going to use AI going forward. AI is the first technology. There's a long string of technologies that have been introduced in fundraising for the last 30 years that I've been fundraising. I've been fundraising more than that. I'll just round it to 30. But I, I'm not old. I'm mid-century modern, I like to say. But the pace of change in the last 5 years has just outpaced anything that came before. And AI is this shocking moment. And the difference with AI from all of the technologies that have come before is AI is the first technology that can replace humans, right? Every other one was a tool of humans, or you could amplify humans, but AI is the first technology that can actually replace humans. And Steve Stapleton is a friend of mine. He's a kind of technology expert. He talks about AI as a manufactured diamond. In a lot of
Hmm.
ways, you can't really tell the difference from a distance, right? When you see a manufactured diamond on someone's finger versus a real diamond, you're not gonna tell the difference standing just a few feet away from them. But when you get close to it, it becomes apparent. You start to understand the difference. And I think that's a great analogy for fundraising. Donors will understand. And if we completely lose, if we use AI to substitute for human connection in fundraising, that is going to just accelerate the very erosion that we have been trying to outrun, of late with the challenges that we have in fundraising. On the other hand, if we use AI to amplify human connection and in ways that allow us to reclaim the time so that we can do things that only humans can do, I think that has the potential to restore our profession. So I think we're at this watershed moment, and how we use this is interesting. This report that came out in the UK this week about giving, and that one of the things that report said was basically, giving is generosity is just not a cultural norm anymore in the UK. And I thought, we may be headed there. We may be headed there if we don't change the way we fundraise. Because I just think, do I have time for a story?
Yeah, please.
I tell a story in the book. It's about a couple that stopped giving, and I met them at a party 20 some years ago. And I was introduced by just an acquaintance, and he's like, "Oh, you're a fundraiser? You got to meet this couple. They got a crazy story." And do you remember, does the name Chuck Feeney ring a bell
Oh,
to
of
you?
course. Yes.
Yeah. So they had read about, this was all the way at the beginning of when Chuck Feeney had kind of rolled out that giving while living kind of model. And what they decided to do, they were an older couple, they had no kids, no heirs, and they decided, their original decision was to give away their whole estate to charity after they died. Well, they read about Chuck Feeney and they're like, we should do this too. We should do this while we're alive. We can experience the joy of giving and see the impact of our giving. Well, um, long story short, the big difference, one of the things that Chuck Feeney didn't really tell people, is that he gave very quietly. He was very, like, Forbes magazine called him the James Bond of philanthropy.
Hmm.
But these folks were like, hey, I want people to tell me how the impact of my gifts. So they were giving out their contact information, etc. Well, of course, agencies started selling that contact information. And before they knew it, these folks were under siege. They were like with the most aggressive forms of fundraising that you can expect. And I could just see it in their eyes. They were so hurt. And I was standing there in the room listening to them. I wasn't defensive, I was just listening.
Hmm.
My heart was sinking for the first time, and maybe one of the only times in my career. It made me ashamed to be a fundraiser. And I feel like it was cathartic for them to share this story with a fundraiser. But it was apparent to me that, something that should have given them joy we robbed them of that joy because of so many of the tactics of how we do fundraising. And they stopped giving altogether,
Oh,
right? And that's one microcosm story of somebody was like, hey, let's really lean into generosity and helping other people. And these tactics that we have taken on in the fundraising industry just completely turned them off to giving altogether. And that's a small snapshot of what's wrong with our industry.
right. And of course, you have stories in the book, and I know you have many stories in your life, in your professional life, of the opposite, of taking a different
Absolutely.
approach, of really, as you said, listening first. That's just one of 7 things you talk about here in terms of behaviors. But you have some examples here that are so relevant and timely. And I know one is about an international aid agency. But if you want to just provide a concrete example, especially for organizations who might be trying to figure out how do I survive the current environment without just sending 1,000 pieces of mail or 1 billion email. Give a concrete example of how an organization managed to do something different and actually made it better for their donors and for the organization's bottom line.
Yeah, and I recognize that when I talk about this stuff, a lot of it sounds aspirational, right? A lot of it's like, well, that's a nice idea, Derek, but how do you really put that into practice? Well, I'll tell you, from a personal perspective, I've bet my company, right, on this concept. And so, just before I kind of answer that question specifically, let me preface it a little bit, just in terms of our path and how we got here. And so, it was shared that 2017 kind of convicting moment in O'Hare Airport, and that led to about a 5-year process over the years of, hey, how do we really start to put this in practice? And I looked at a lot of different ways. At the time, we were primarily a major gift fundraising consulting agency, working alongside fundraising agencies. So we were working alongside the big fundraising agencies. We were getting referred in. We were helping them, with their clients and major giving. But what was really becoming apparent to me was that the industry itself, these agencies, traditional agencies, and I'm not saying this to disparage other agencies, but we're moving down this path of just transactional kind of just, very standard transactions and high volume and milking the system for what it was worth. And I decided there was a moment where it became clear to me. It was like, this just isn't a winning equation. If we're going to get into this, if we're going to help clients the way we want to help clients, we have to get into this pool kind of all in. And so we jumped in the pool. And then, long story short, in 2022, we started our own agency. And it was a little upstart thing, but it was based on this whole concept. It was based on this concept because it's one thing to propose it, it's another to prove it. And so, the irony is, we didn't know how this was going to go, but the market was hungry kind of for what we were advocating, these ideas that we were evangelizing. And we started, we won clients that we had, right, that we didn't expect would come work with us. And so for the last few years, we've been working with these clients and implementing this particular model. And it is working, Jay. And so, chapter 6 of the book is called Proof of Concept, and it shares some of these stories. And this particular one is a great example because, the executive vice president who hired us had a lot of resistance from the board. And this
Hmm.
organization was very kind of on with the old way of doing things. This is the way that they were not risk takers. They were not, right. So they finally gave in and they said, well, we're not going to do this kind of all in. We're going to run kind of an A/B test. We're going to run our program the way we've always run it, and Dickerson Baker can come in and run, right, their program alongside, and let's see what happens. Well, I'll tell you, we made believers of them, on every metric, you know. And this was a big organization, so they had a large enough file to split it right down the middle like that. But long story short, on donor retention, on average gift size, on donor satisfaction, on every metric, not just a little bit, there was a strong turnaround. And here's the biggest story. This organization had been on a 5-year decline in giving. Their file had shrunk from, over 100,000 total active donors to fewer than 50,000. And so, um, every year it was kind of like, how do we staunch the bleeding? But their whole their whole thinking was, well, direct response just doesn't work anymore, so we just have to try to manage it, right? We don't, it's kind of like we're not going to try to cure it, we're just going to try to manage it. And I give a lot of credit to this executive vice president who really kind of put her head on the chopping block and said, no, there is a better way. And I believe that, these guys can help us do it. These folks can help us do it. And I'll tell you, we made believers out of the board. And so that was about a 6 to 12 month test. But that's a great example that these principles really work. They do work. And you don't have to implement them disruptively. This another story in the book, we talk about, this franchisee, this McDonald's franchisee who, I think it was back in the 70s, was had a McDonald's franchise really close to a major army base. And the military imposed these regulations at the time that the servicemen couldn't leave their vehicles in uniform. And the problem is a lot of them would stop at McDonald's on the way home or whatever, but for whatever reason, the military had this regulation. So they couldn't come into the restaurant anymore and buy food at the local McDonald's. Well, his business was hurting like crazy. So he kind of came up with this wacky idea. He basically cut a hole in the wall so that he could just serve people through this hole in the wall as they drove by. And this is the crazy thing about, right? That story is, think about how that has just changed culture today. Billions of people, right, are getting food through drive-throughs, not because there was some major strategic plan or feasibility study or board meetings and this, that, the other thing. It's because a guy was solving a simple problem and cut a hole in the wall. And that's the spirit of this book, right? Don't try to change everything all the time. It starts with simple conviction, just it starts and ends with conviction, frankly. But, it's about just doing some of those things, stacking wins. Lou Holtz died last week. Are you a football fan? Yeah, so Lou Holtz, an old football coach, Notre Dame coach, legendary coach, right? He had this acronym that I love. It's what's important now, right? And he used that a lot. And the acronym is WIN, right? But it was always about what's important right now. And I talk in this book, and I talk, to our team members. It's about stacking the small wins. It's the small wins. It's the little things you can begin to do. It's personalizing gratitude. It's really making sure you're doing thank yous to donors. It's really, making sure that you're earning their next gift and not just taking them for granted. And you can begin to implement these things. It doesn't get bigger and costlier until you really try to scale it. But you can start small, and it works small. And the irony is it generates enough return that then you can invest more as time goes on.
It also sounds like it's dynamic. You're not just replacing an old system with a new system and hoping for the best. You're constantly reiterating. If you wouldn't cut a hole in the wall to serve burgers unless you discovered not only that that's what you thought people wanted, but actually they started buying the burgers that way. And I guess that would be true of any of these programs, right? I mean, it's not just one new kind of email. It's a whole bunch of things that you're doing iteratively in order to address whatever that relationship concern is and make people a part of your work.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's the most important takeaway, really. Towards the end of the book, I say, this story is still being written. We're very much at the beginning, not at the end. AI is in its infancy. These trends that we're seeing, we're just beginning in the industry to wake up to them. And I see this book basically as a prologue to the bigger story. And my goal here really wasn't to sell books. It isn't to sell books, right? I'm not going to get rich selling a niche book in a trade market. It wasn't just to, right? It wasn't intended as a sales piece for our business. Well, really, it was fundamentally based on that conviction that kind of, came at me in that O'Hare Airport experience in 2017. My goal is to spark a movement, and that we can really shift back to an older and truer form of fundraising, which is based on relationship and human connection. And it's not about scale so much as the opportunity to scale. I'd be advocating this even if AI didn't exist. But the fact that AI is here now, and the fact that we have these technologies that allow us to do this at scale, it's this crazy opportunity. And so everybody who's listening to this today, everybody involved in the fundraising industry, they get to help write that next chapter. None of this is written yet. This is just very much the beginning of the story. We can kind of go forward with our eyes kind of closed and pretending that this is right, nothing's changed, that this is just a temporary dislocation or the new reality. Or we can embrace this and say, this is a new opportunity to really um, change the face of philanthropy and restore, right, generosity across the board.
It also sounds like it's not just business for you. I don't mean just the firm, but you start the book with a quote from your dad, and or a reference to the kind of advice he would give you, and then you end the book with some kind of a moral message here. So how much of this for you is really about that?
Oh, it's woven into my DNA. That quote. Um, my father died at an early age. He was 61. I was in my 20s, and my kids have never met him, but he was a he. I come from a family that comes from with a strong sense of mission and purpose and ministry. And I share some of that. And ironically, I was the kind of the guy that was driven more towards business and entrepreneurship and things like that. And he always pushed me. I was right. It's like the dedication of the book to him is because it really is, kind of that beautiful intersection, my opportunity to kind of live this experience of having a business that is serving nonprofits that help organizations lives and help organizations get, make people's lives better. But it's a business for me. It's that intersection of mission and purpose and business that is just this incredible thing. But that mission to me is what drives it. That's right. That's really, at heart, especially as I get, older in life and it's just, that's the thing that's more important than anything. And I care about this industry. I mean, I've been doing this since 1990, and I've seen kind of how this industry has gone. And I learned my craft, as we talked about kind of pre-show, from Jerry Panis, a former colleague of yours, who is a legend in fundraising and in major giving. And and one of the things that I learned early on is there's no more human way to fundraise than relational connection. It's so rewarding. That's why so many people got into this industry in the first place. But we're burning people out because we've made it into something else. And and for me, if I can have one voice into this conversation to say, stop, let's go back to what this really was meant to be. And and previously we couldn't do that because we couldn't raise enough, right, with just a major gift department. But AI allows us to take major gift principles and make it the complete operating system for fundraising. And that's what I'm preaching and evangelizing. So I guess I am a preacher like my dad was.
Thank you so much for this, Derek. Really appreciate it. Where can people get the book?
Well, it is still available on pre-order right now, so it's
Oh,
not
that's right.
yeah, it doesn't release until April 20, I think April 27. So, but they can go to Amazon and get a pre-order. They can follow me on LinkedIn, and we'll be giving all the announcements, when it does come out. But we've got a little bit before it actually comes out. But stay tuned. I think we'll be hearing about this as time goes on.
We'll make sure to include a link, at least to both your LinkedIn profile and the other places where people can learn about the book, A Better Way to Fundraise. Thank you so much, Derek, for this. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay.
My thanks again to Derek for that interview and for telling us all about the book. I know we had questions in the chat during the live session today about that. Hopefully it answered some of your questions. The book will be available in 1 month's time. Also, our thanks to Roger Alley for his contributions to our understanding today. And I hope that you will all be looking forward to AFP if you plan to go to San Diego to hear more from him, as well as to perhaps drop by and say hello to me. I'd love to meet you there. As the conversation continues across the Philanthropy Mastermind series, I want to share some of that which is coming up with you. On the most recent episode of the PM podcast, I spoke with Glenn Galich, CEO of the Stupski Foundation, host of the Break Fake Rules podcast, and author of the new book, which is making a lot of headlines actually, called Control: Why Big Giving Falls Short. We explore his journey through philanthropy and his challenge to many of the assumptions that shape modern giving, particularly around power, control, and who gets to decide where the resources flow. And coming up this Friday on the podcast, I'll be joined by Julie Castle, CEO of Best Friends Animal Society. We talk about her origin story, which begins with, quite frankly, an amazing road trip that turned into leadership of an organization having profound impact on the no-kill movement to dramatically reduce the number of animals that have been killed in shelters, and to a much smaller number today, largely through the work of Best Friends Animal Society and related partnership organizations. And next week on How to Raise, our sister program, available for CFRE credit as well, we'll present a special Mark Conference sampler episode called Donor Advised Funds, Prospect Development Metrics, and Ethical Due Diligence. It's quite a lot. We're going to be featuring several leaders in the field, including Melissa Banks-Stepnow, Catherine Flatten, and Adrian Robertson, talking about how DAFs are reshaping giving, how to measure the impact of prospect development, and how teams can lead on ethical due diligence, one of the subjects that, of course, in relation to AI came up in the chat today, and it's something we cover regularly in the series, How to Raise. You can find out about all of these conversations at the website of our sponsor, DonorSearch.net, as well as in an email that will come to all live attendees with links to this recording and any other links that we have referenced here today. I'm Jay Frost. Thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.